All right, so I'm super excited tonight. I've been trying to get in touch with this candidate for a long time, mainly because I lived in his district, the 23rd district of Florida. I lived down in Davie, Florida, right around the corner from Nova University, where Tim Canova, I believe, was a law professor. So I'm excited to have Tim Canova with me tonight. Tim, how are you this evening?
Very fine. Thank you, Benjamin. Appreciate being with you.
Awesome. Awesome. Listen, it's a big day, and I know you have a very important campaign, and I honestly think that your campaign now means a lot more to a lot of people because of what it symbolizes. You are running against the former DNC chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and she has become kind of like the flashpoint, and she's become like this emblem of the establishment that many Bernie Sanders supporters are opposing. And on a day like today, where Bernie Sanders has conceded and endorsed Hillary Clinton, what do you think that means for your race? And what would you say to those disillusioned Bernie Sanders supporters?
Well, first of all, I'll point out that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is not actually the former DNC chair yet. I know that there have been some stories that her hands have been taken off the controls of the DNC and that she's just the head in title only. Who knows? The fact is she still is the head of the DNC. She's been a lousy DNC chair, and she needs to be removed not just from the DNC, but she really needs to be removed from office. She's been a very ineffective congresswoman. In the course of just the last few weeks, it's unbelievable what we have uncovered. Last year, she had the highest absentee record of anyone in the Florida congressional delegation except Marco Rubio. And she introduced all of 5 bills last year and not a single hearing from a single bill. And that's a side note. I mean, she's been taking millions of dollars in campaign contributions from the largest corporations and Wall Street banks, and she's been voting for their interests over the interests of South Florida residents. That's why I got into the race. Now, you're absolutely right. On a day like today, where Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the presidential race effectively, I do think that the race that we have here in South Florida takes on a much more of a center stage, you can say. People have always known it's an important race. If we could beat an incumbent like this, who's so well funded by the biggest corporations, it really puts incumbents all over the country on notice that there's a political movement afoot, that progressives have had it, and that it's time for change. And the model for change is a grassroots kind of a campaign where the fundraising comes from the grassroots and the campaigning itself is done at the local level, at the grassroots level.
That's one of the reasons I've been excited about your campaign. You mentioned some of the issues there in South Florida. One of the issues I know about, because you cannot drive around South Florida, Davie in particular, and not run into a check cashing store. And you see the the exorbitant interest rates. I mean, sometimes it's like an interest rate of 350% that a person is charged on a payday loan. And the check cashing store is usually where people go to get payday loans. This was a former life, so I know about it. But it's really a major issue there. And then to see some of the things that Debbie Wasserman Schultz had said in support of that industry and some of the money that she gets. Speak to that issue in your community and what it means to your constituents and on a national level.
Well, you know, this is a large district I'm in. It's all the way from Weston on the west side, which is a very affluent area, to east along the coast, Hollywood and Dania Beach and Hallandale. These are much lower income areas. And all over Florida, you see payday loan companies and check cashing companies. And in large part, the abuses, as you said, over 300% interest rates, a cycle of debt, a debt trap that folks get caught in. A lot of this is because of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. When she was, before she was a congresswoman, she was a member of the Florida legislature, and she helped craft Florida's payday lending law, which has been denounced by all kinds of civil rights and consumer protection groups all over the state of Florida. I've called her out on it. She actually was pushing a Republican bill earlier this year in Congress, which would prevent President Obama's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from regulating payday lenders. And her response was, well, you know, if these low-income folks don't have payday lenders to go to, they're going to have to go to loan sharks. And this is really a false choice. You know, a loan shark might break their kneecaps, but the payday lenders just, you know, automatically debit their accounts, They foreclose on their properties. They essentially put liens on their property. They make people homeless and on the street. And to say that there's no other progressive alternative is such a trope. It really comes from Wall Street. You can take a look at what Elizabeth Warren has been pushing and what I've been advocating as a law professor for years. Reinvigorate the postal system. This country from 1911, I think, until 1967, essentially from Teddy Roosevelt to John Kennedy just about, the postal system was a vibrant banking system. It had checking accounts for low-income folks. And, now if somebody can't afford to get a checking account at a private bank, they've got to go to a check cashing store. They've got to pay over 10% of their check to the company just to get it the check cashed. It's outrageous.
And I know that issue. Go ahead.
If I may just say, Debbie has taken $68,000, I believe, from the payday lending industry over the last few years, and it goes even beyond that $68,000. You take a look, who is funding the payday lenders? Who is giving them a line of credit? It's the big Wall Street banks. Absolutely. And Debbie has been taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from those big Wall Street banks.
Absolutely, man. And listen, it's I've done plenty of research on this industry and how it is intentionally designed, along with some policies by banks, to find ways of capitalizing on poor people. I mean, that's what this industry is for. And so what you're doing down there in that campaign is so significant and so important. I want to ask you about a different dynamic, though. You're running against an incumbent. You're running against a Democrat. And one thing that we have unfortunately shifted to in this political era is where we are so beholden to people who are in office that we really kind of brush aside or try to suppress anyone who's challenging an incumbent. Tell us about some of the pushback that you've gotten in comparison to the support that you've gotten, and what would you say to other people who have an incumbent in a seat that needs to be vacated because they don't represent our progressive values?
Yeah. Well, we have gotten pushback from the beginning, and it's from the establishment, right from the top. The Florida State Democratic Party tried to cut us off access to the voter database, exactly what Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her DNC tried to do to Bernie Sanders last December. And, any kind of establishment organization or leadership of establishment entities, they have pushed back and they favor Wasserman Schultz. So we see a number of unions that have endorsed her without ever screening us, a number of Democratic caucuses around the state that have endorsed her without ever screening. So, how democratic are those processes? Every endorsement that we've gotten, that my campaign has gotten, Communication Workers of America, the National Nurses United, a couple of local unions, the Transport Workers Union and a Pipe Fitters Union, and there's more lined up. All of those endorsements have been fair, open processes where the candidates get an opportunity to speak, to get screened on questionnaires, not with Wasserman Schultz. So the cards have been stacked against us, but I'll tell you, I never thought we were going to win this race by getting the votes of the establishment. The grassroots has come alive here. Our name recognition, our popularity, our message is resonating. That's what it really is. And one issue that's just come alive in the past few weeks, sadly, is the environment. It's been a national news story that the filthy water from Lake Okeechobee has been coming right through the St. Lucie River down to the Atlantic Ocean with a sludge, a blue-green algae tide that is killing any sea life in its path. And a couple of weeks ago, my campaign went up to Stewart, 2 hours north of here, to inspect this toxic sludge. It was nauseating and completely avoidable. And a lot of it is the big agriculture and the big sugar farms surrounding Lake Okeechobee. They pump for decades fertilizers, phosphates, nitrates into the lake, and it would normally, you'd say, it would filtrate through the Everglades themselves. Right. But the water has been diverted. The south shore of Lake Okeechobee is filled with sugar plantations, right, which stops the natural flow of water. Because of that, the Everglades and Florida Bay have not been replenished, and South Florida's aquifer here, the drinking water of millions of South Floridians, is now endangered. It's becoming more salinated, you could say. And there are solutions that have been offered, the former governor, Charlie Crist, had reached a deal where the state would exercise eminent domain, take the sugar plantations, pay for them $1 billion, and then convert it to marshland so that we could renew the natural flow of Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades. But Governor Rick Scott, the Republican, has stopped it from happening. And I should say Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been taking a lot of money. Her largest single contributor was the sugar companies. She takes even more money in aggregate from big agricultural companies. And she's done nothing to help the situation. She's been completely silent on this. She talks about how her seniority in Congress should help South Floridians. Well, she's never used it to get an appropriation to solve this problem, to buy up the sugar plantations. And in fact, her voting record is just abysmal. The highest absentee rate of any congressman, anyone in the Florida delegation, save Marco Rubio, and having introduced only 5 bills last year that have gone nowhere. It's really a terrible record.
So let's talk about that a little bit more then. Let's unpack that. Well, actually, from this perspective, you haven't been given an opportunity to debate Debbie Wasserman Schultz at this point. And is there a debate in the works? What does that look like? Because there's some issues that you guys really disagree on in a significant fashion. And I think all eyes would be on this debate.
I agree with you. And, a number of reporters, TV hosts, radio hosts have now extended debate invitations to both Debbie Wasserman Schultz and myself. I've accepted every single one. She's ignored every single one. She hasn't even rejected them. She just ignores them like she can't be bothered responding. The 2 local papers here, the Sun Sentinel has their editorial board has said that they're not ready to endorse anyone. They want to see debates. There was a major op-ed in the Miami Herald by Michael Putney, the dean of TV broadcast, political broadcast journalism here, calling for a debate, and she just dodges it. She dodges the debates all the time. And you mentioned I'm a law professor. I'm currently a law professor at Nova Southeastern University. I've been teaching at the law school level for 2 decades now, and for 20 years I've been debating folks a lot smarter than me on a regular basis. I don't think Debbie Wasserman Schultz has ever debated anyone in her congressional career, and I think she's afraid of debates. She should be afraid of debates. She cannot defend her record. She has been swimming in corporate money, and she has been shilling for them and ignoring the interests of South Floridians.
Oh, Tim, I absolutely love that. I thought you were getting ready to say, I don't think Debbie Wasserman Schultz wants to debate me. I was hoping you would say that because we would take that soundbite and send that everywhere. But I'll say it. I don't think she wants to debate you. And I think the residents and the constituents of the 23rd District of Florida deserve an opportunity to hear an alternative. So how do we get that debate? How do we make that happen?
Well, we now just launched TV ads. It's very exciting that we're now at this stage that we were able to launch some ads at the local level. And one of the ads is a montage of Debbie. At the beginning, she's talking about the importance of debates in a democracy for candidates to be able to get their message out. And the rest of the 60 seconds is a montage of clips of either media folks asking her questions or people from the general public asking her the same question. When will you debate Tim Canova? Will you ever debate Tim Canova? And she just turns, grimaces, walks away because Debbie Wasserman Schultz is afraid to debate me.
That's what we wanted to. That's what I wanted to hear. I'm going to be honest with you. It's really at the point. It's at the point where I think you have a lot more support today. And we were behind you. Like I've been, and your office knows. I know you've been super busy. We've been trying to get up with you for at least like 5 months. So, we've had your back for some time. For me, it's because I'm from the district, right? And I know every issue that you just outlined. I know about the check cashing scams. I know about the environmental issues down there. And we'll talk about some police reform in a second. But I'm passionate about my home. That's my second home there now.
I had no idea. Benjamin, I had no idea you were from South Florida.
Oh yeah, no, and I have a couple of names that I'm gonna send you offline that I want you to reach out to if you don't already have them on your team for some really sharp people down there that can help you out. But here's where I want to go with the conversation here. If I can squeeze a few more minutes out of your time, let's talk about your police reform. Let's talk about, because the other issue that I was getting ready to list is the issue of Black Lives Matter. And South Florida is is still Florida, and Florida is a very different place. And we know this is where the entire movement almost started with Sanford, Florida, not in your district, but close enough, with Trayvon Martin, and then more recently in Palm Beach Gardens. Again, that's outside of your district. For those listening, a friend of mine, Corey Jones, who was gunned down by an officer just recently this year. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So sorry. I didn't know you were his friend.
Yeah, no, I knew Corey for about 10, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. I never really went back and put a start date on our friendship. But what are your thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement? What are your thoughts about police reform, and particularly as it pertains to your district?
Yeah, it's a problem in my district, and it's a problem all over South Florida. A few years ago, not many years ago, just 3 or 4, there was a couple of shootings in Miami where young black men were shot to death for painting graffiti onto a building. Yeah. Punishment has to fit the crime. And unfortunately, we've seen even no crime whatsoever. Even, graffiti is what? A crime against property, but it doesn't warrant execution. And now we see a lot of black folks in this country, and we see it more and more because of cell phone cameras are everywhere. So this obviously has been going on for years, but now there's documentation of what's been happening. And, young black men mostly being slain for no reason except they're black. So, I do agree. Black Lives Matter. We have to be doing something about this, and not just tinkering. This society is suffering from racism, from an economic crisis that goes on forever. It's a combined, you could say. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, the way racism and unrestrained capitalism and militarism were in combination, just a lethal combination. And I think you see this happening. And, let me try to unpack it a little bit. This is a big topic, and, where do you start and where do you finish? I'll say I've been against the war on drugs. And I mention that because the war on drugs becomes a pretext for this kind of police surveillance, especially of the African American community, but also Hispanics, Native Americans. If the police were to be doing the stop and frisk in white neighborhoods, like even wealthy white neighborhoods, Wall Street, Beverly Hills, of course, they'd be finding probably more drug possession in those neighborhoods than they find typically in an African American poor neighborhood. Yeah. But it becomes a pretext for this surveillance that is imposed in a very racially and ethnically discriminatory fashion. And we should stop the war on drugs. It's been going on way too long. It's not been effective. It's been an abysmal failure. And this is another big difference between myself and Wasserman Schultz. She hasn't even been able to come out in favor of medical marijuana. And this state had a referendum 2 years ago where medical marijuana fell short just by a little bit. It needed 60% of the vote to pass. It got 58%, I believe. And she was dead set against it. I've been for medical marijuana for years. I'm for decriminalizing it. Miami-Dade and Broward counties have both taken steps in the right direction by at least giving the police the discretion to issue summonses for the first 3 offenses for the possession of minor amounts of marijuana. The federal government should deschedule marijuana from its controlled substance list. It should allow the states to be the laboratories of change and of reform. And, I do applaud that the Democratic Party now has this in its platform. And, of course, that is thanks to the Bernie Sanders delegates. The federal government should be out of the business of criminalizing drug use. It should be seen as a public health problem. And this society really needs to be providing a vibrant job market for all of its citizens from the ground up, from the bottom up, so that folks don't even have any need to go into the drug trade just to make ends meet or because they don't see any other avenue in life that's worthwhile. Yeah. And at the same time, police departments need to be reformed. They have to more reflect the neighborhoods that they actually patrol. We need body cameras on police to record this stuff. The police departments have gotten very militarized at the same time that our society has, between video games and everything else, violent video games, that is. From very young age, Americans get very desensitized to violence, and we see an awful lot of violence on TV and from very young age. And, when law enforcement is patrolling in very difficult circumstances, they really are But you get a lot of law enforcement folks who just are not properly trained, and many of them have racial biases. And these problems are pervasive, and not just to South Florida. Obviously, this is a nationwide problem, really every corner of this country.
Thank you for placing into the context of that conversation not only the criminal justice reforms, not only the police reforms, but also economic reforms that would help fix some of the problems that lead to crime in the first place. A lot of people like to conveniently discuss the racial component, but never discuss the economic component, which actually could alleviate much of the crime that we find in impoverished communities. So thank you so much for that. I want to ask you these last two questions, and they might intertwine. In 2011, you actually participated in the Occupy movement, and you got a chance to see firsthand the rise and the subsequent fall, relatively a fall for the Occupy movement. In light of what happened today, everyone is looking for leaders. Everyone is looking for someone to take the helm and take the charge of the progressive movement. But what would you say to all of the people who are disillusioned? What would you say to the people who are ready to throw in the towel for the progressive movement? What's next? What do we do from here?
We don't have a choice. We can't throw in the towel. What does that even look like, to throw in the towel? The progressive movement has been growing, and Occupy Wall Street was, and I was in Occupy Los Angeles, essentially teaching a workshop on the Federal Reserve and Wall Street. That was my involvement. And I was impressed with the encampment and the folks that I met in the encampment. These were folks who got hurt so badly by the 2008 financial collapse, but they didn't have the Federal Reserve and the federal government coming to their rescue. It's socialism for those at the top, for big Wall Street banks and hedge funds. They're the ones who get bailed out. Everyone else is living in a very tough environment where there's a lot of sharp elbows and there's not enough opportunity. And, what does it look like to give up on the progressive movement? Does it look like Donald Trump? I mean, because you get an awful lot of folks who are going over into that direction. And, you take a look at the Great Depression, you had Franklin Roosevelt and a progressive movement take hold, but you also had neo-Nazis in this country. I guess you wouldn't call them neo-Nazis, but there were brown shirt rallies in this country at the time that Roosevelt took office. We can't just check out. This progressive movement has gotten a lot of momentum. It's heartbreaking that Bernie Sanders apparently has fallen short, but Bernie himself has talked about the importance of the down ballot races, and people have to step up. I never thought I was going to run for a political office. It's a lot of personal sacrifice to do something like this, but our campaign has grown because other people have stepped up in so many meaningful ways. Thousands of people have contributed small amounts of money to this campaign that have added up and allowed us to run a real campaign. And people all over the country, if they're not donating small amounts of money, they're phone banking, they're knocking on doors, they're running for office. This is what has to be done. We have to take back our democracy. And, a day like today, people are heartbroken. Fine. We got to lick our wounds, wake up in the morning and get back to work and keep fighting, because, it's not just the kind of world we're living in. It's the kind of world that the next 7 generations are going to face. Human beings cannot afford at this stage, with the range of problems we're facing, to just check out and say, well, it didn't work out, so it's somebody else's problem. I'm not going to play anymore.
Yeah. Tim Canova, candidate for Congress, 23rd District of Florida, running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Listen, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and discuss all of these important topics. Go for it.
I'd like to thank you. I'd like to urge folks to go to timcanova.com, contribute small amounts or phone bank for us, spread the word through social media. We're in a very crucial stage in this campaign, 2 weeks before the absentee ballots go out in the mail, and a lot of folks here vote by absentee. 2 weeks before folks have to be registered Democrat to vote in an August 30th primary. This is the home stretch. This is the final stretch. And we need folks every day to step up and help us if we're going to win this race.
Absolutely. You took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to tell you to tell everyone how they can get up with you and how they can help you. But thanks so much. And you said it's timcanova.com. What's the correct domain?
Yes, that's right. That is it.
Awesome. Best of luck to you. I'll be talking with you offline and doing what I can to help you out, because I believe in your campaign. And if any of my listeners believe in it, I'm sure they'll find a way to support you. So thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Benjamin. I really appreciate being with you. Thank you.
Awesome. 857-600-0518 is the number to call if you want to join the conversation. Really appreciate Professor Tim Canova. We could have called him that, right? Professor Canova, for joining us and discussing his campaign. Listen, folks, you know, it'll be one hell of a consolation prize to get Debbie Wasserman Schultz out of office. I'll tell you, I'm just going to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, she was one of the #1 reasons that Hillary Clinton got the baked in advantage that she got. So, you know, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know, you support him or don't support him. You donate to whoever you want. I'm not trying to tell you where to go, but I would say this: if you want to see some change and get something out of this, that's the race that we should be focused on top of all the other races. And I like what he said. Same thing that Bernie has been saying. Same thing that Aaron Bowersock said. Same thing that I'm telling you. It's your participation at this point. Don't look for another leader. You are the leader that needs to step up and step in. So many other things we got to talk about tonight, but I just want to drive that home.